Blessed love and peace. This is an inaugural iteration of a prospective series. What's going on? Another series. Anyway, um, the premise of this series, the working title, and additionally, is the mixed heritage. We're gonna say mixed race, but mixed heritage, world history, deep dive, or deep dives, deep dive. All right. And the idea with this, so I'll just give background, like what's going on. What happened was, I saw an episode of the uploads, the broadcasts of Grimfrost, which is a Scandinavian heritage group out of Sweden, that has paraphernalia, clothing, tools, weapons, but also does culture about Scandinavian heritage, and has a podcast that does recordings talking with professors and archaeologists and other people about Viking heritage, history, culture, experiences, music, and otherwise, beliefs, and further. So it's informative, it's interesting, particularly for those who have an interest and have that heritage. But what's appreciated particularly is it does somewhat of a deep dive into the topic. So one of the brethren who organizes it and is the host and interviews a lot of the guests, and it does it periodically. It's not like an everyday kind of thing or whatever, but it cover a number of different topics. And he interviews people, and the conversation is about an hour and a half thereabouts. It's relaxed. It's not a formulaic kind of thing. It looks like it's I won't say grassroots, but like a homegrown kind of adventure. So the authenticity therein is what I'm speaking to. So there's appreciation for that, and the conversations are interesting. Tend to be informative and tend to be detailed, rather informative, insightful, and just some valuable information that is shared. And their specifics, their details. It's talking about a specific experience or episode or otherwise, and it's with people who are in the know, people who are experts, professionals, artists, cultural experts, and otherwise. So these are people with knowledge, and speak very easily and fluidly, and with the host. So all that being said, the consideration is how valuable that is in our mixed heritage experience to advance the conversation beyond ourselves and to provide it some context. And I talk about roots and I talk about ancestors. And now other cats are talking about that too. But now, let's do that. And I've ventured to do this. We have ventured to do this a number of years ago with one of the joints we do before one of the sessions, one of the series. We were highlighting books and stories, interviews of other mixed kinfolk within this generation or recent generations. This endeavor today, at this moment, this series of the mixed heritage, world history, deep dive, is intended to be somewhat different. For like a number of the previous joints, the intention is to be conversational. So it's not just me running my mouth. That's one thing. But it's conversational because in that conversation, like with the example of Grimfrost, is that there's in that exchange, there's further accessibility with the audience, further participation with the audience, rather than just being like a two-way lecture type of joint. It provides some like assurance, like, wait a minute, it's not just some dude by himself doing things, but there's actually other people involved in additionally. So there's that. And also, it's beneficial to hear different insights, and it provides it for further conversation and reasoning. So, and to do something in a deep dive type manner, to have an hour-long conversation about something specific within mixed heritage. So what are we talking about actually? What am I talking about actually? So this is what we're talking about. For example, today, this session, The topic is on W.E.B. Du Bois, or otherwise known as Du Bois. William Edward Bernhard Du Bois. That's it, in a deep dive. Talking about him, his life, his work, for better and for worse, and for further. Where are the books? Where are the books? Where are the books? Oh, here we go. All right. This is one of the seminal works, the classics of W.E.B. Du Bois. The Souls of Black Folk. And so the idea of this series is to talk about a specific topic and to delve into it, the details, not just this book, but W.E.B. Du Bois. I don't even think they show a picture of him in here now. For like an hour. And it being conversational, whether it's through YouTube or through Zoom or otherwise. But the idea is doing this on a number of different topics in the mixed heritage experience around the world. So, for example, upcoming topics of consideration to do sessions on at this moment and at this stage. This is the what we call this. It's not the invitation stage. It's like the test stage or something like that. So the idea right now, God willing, is to do a number of these joints, and it's just going to be me talking, and I'm talking just extemporaneously. Like I'm talking based from what my basic knowledge is from my work and studies and practice. So I'm not doing any preliminary research or much preparation or whatever. I'm just speaking kind of off the cuff about each of these topics, whatever I know at the moment about the topics, and see how long that goes for it to be meaningful and insightful and valuable, and then that's it. And so talking about different topics and give kinfolk some kind of experience of what this is, like what the conversation is like, how valuable it is in and of itself, how valuable it is with other kinfolk participating in the conversation, how valuable it is when doing research to prepare beforehand so that the details are greater. And the interaction, the insights, the questions, the pontifications, the reasoning is further substantive and interactive. So that's the invitation. We're in this invitation zone. So the intention is for me to record a number of these sessions on a number of different topics. These topics include, like again, today it's W.E.B. Du Bois. And then other iterations that I think of just for myself that we consider for me to share, Dolo style, just like this, includes Louis Riel and the Métis Nation, the whole history of Eurasians in Singapore, Hafus in Brazil, in the Guarani land. What else we talk about? Oh, the Khadwal Capetonians, the Cape Coloreds, the history and contemporary experience of colored folk in South Africa. Moshe Rabbeinu, him marrying a black woman. What? Yes. A Cushite woman. So, talk about that. What's going on? So, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, marrying a Jewish woman. Huh? Yes. A Christian woman. What? Yes. Talk about that. Deep dive. Talk about the details as much as I know. Now, again, I'm not preparing much further information or research or whatever for any of these sessions because this is the test stage. We'll see what the receptivity is. Basically, we're looking for kinfolk to participate, to say, yo, I want to talk about that. And even if they don't know about it, to read up on it a little bit, just to talk about it and ask questions. So, but it's being conversational. And if not that, and or say, yo, you should talk with so-and-so. And we say, beautiful. Here's our contact information. They're welcome to holler at us. We've reached out for a long time. So if kinfolk want to jump on and say, yo, let's talk about this. Yo, what's up? What's happening? Let's go. But that's what this is. It's a test session to give an idea what this is like, what the experience is like. And I'm sweating. I just had some dal and some hot chili pepper with some curry powder and rice. Dan already said the blessings, so we partake of the agua. because the sweat got to come from somewhere. All right. So that's what this is, giving an idea what the sessions are, and again, about an hour thereabouts. See what it is, what it do, and how long I can talk about it. To be honest about it myself specifically. Now, one of the thoughts was to have some materials prepared to share in this joint. So I may read an excerpt from here. We'll see how that goes, God willing. I do have a poem that's not actually from W.E.B. Du Bois. And I thought about sharing another poem that I intend to reference at some point, God willing, but I don't have it available at the moment. I have to do some grieving right now. Yeah. Just recognize something. It's all my fault, but there's a very valuable book that is provided from my far long time ago, which is the Negro Heritage Library. And it's an encyclopedia of black culture that has poems and short stories and original writings within the black diaspora that was established over half a century ago. So my father has it in his library and passes it down to me. I have it, and then what I'm recently reminded of is that I had it with some other holy books in our schoolhouse, and in recent months kinfolk done helped themselves and took the luggage that I was in. And I'm just now recognizing that that book was most likely in that bag, in that luggage as well. So, all right, now that's done. Because I was thinking, well, maybe the poem is in that book. May likely actually be in that book. But for the moment, we are without, and I'm not going to search for it otherwise, because don't have much of anything else here. Like, much of what I have in life is already given. So there's little searching for it because there's little else here. Gave much of the books I had elsewhere otherwise away. So anyway, maybe not with that poem today, but the point is that for other sessions, and additionally, the intention is to share poems, to share writings, and to share photographs, and additionally to make it further multimedia, or at least informative, and give it some context and some breadth rather than just like first or second person verbalization. It's other voices, other experiences and media included within the narrative. So, that being said, I gave some. I should write those down. So if I'm going to say them, I have to be accountable, and it's going to be helpful for recollection. If a writation that was rather conceived or contrived. We're just going to write notes here. We said, let's see, W.E.B. Du Bois today. Oh, you're made privy to the process. Such privilege. You saw that. We said Louis Riel. We said, we said Eurasians in Singapore. And we said Hafu in Brazil. Why do I say Brazil? Why do you say Brazil? Guarani land. How about that? And we said Khadwal. Keep tuning. Keep tuned. What else we say? Is that it? What we say? What else we say? Oh, we said right. Moshe Rabbeinu. And we said Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I just wrote Moshe Rabbeinu twice. Interesting Freudian, that is. I'm going to throw one other one in the mix. How about this? Indo-Aryan migration. So talking about like the relationship between Europe and India, the language, through the millennia, and like the stages of civilization that emerge within that. how interesting that may be, the details we can glean from that. We'll see. We'll see. Trying to be some geographical representation. Um, I'm not going to write this one down, so it's already qualified as such. But one consideration is actually maybe changing it up. Now we're getting a little bit ahead because, that's already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, ocho. Ocho sessions. That's a lot of work put in front of myself in this test zone. If I talk for 30 minutes about the preface, that might cover the hour. So we're gonna hold off on like putting all this stuff in front of myself at the moment. That's enough right there. So let's get into the topic, the life, the works, the gifts, the sharings of Dr. William Edward Bernard Du Bois. So, to give some context, W.E.B. Du Bois was born in, I want to say 1963. What I say, 19? I want to say, it couldn't be 1863. Maybe 1865. I imagine it's right here. Oh, how about this? 1868. In Massachusetts, Greater Barrington. So, he's actually born into a comparatively moderately wealthy family. He's definitely mixed heritage, but from even after all these years of studying and reading him additionally, in my awareness, I'm unaware of any one of his parents being quote unquote European explicitly. So I think he comes from that experience of just coming from mixed heritage, both his parents being mixed heritage. That's my understanding. Now, that being said, he grows up in a very European environment. He describes this in his book, particularly in the first chapter. So in the first chapter, he grows up in Massachusetts, New England, in the New England culture back in the 19th century in the Gregorian calendar, 1868 as it says here in the Gregorian calendar, him being born. And he grows up in a comparatively affluent environment. Education is significant. He goes to school with people of European ancestry. This is during the time of abolition and further. So there is a pretense of a culture of acceptance. And additionally, at least within like the front room of the upper middle class society. And additionally, however, even in that experience, William Du Bois, I'll get into the whole Du Bois thing, God willing, in a minute. So Du Bois still recognizes him being hated on. He describes this in the first chapter, and in doing that, he like begins that age-old mixed heritage existential angst of who am I, and additionally, but even a lot of that realm of self-discovery that people do today is less available for him at that moment because the conditions are different, and so he still delves deep into that, but at the same time he's dealing with the actuality of the hatred or whatever. And so a lot of the discourse that he shares is a reaction to the animosities that are communicated from European society, generally, systemically, as well as specifically. So anyways, he talks about that experience growing up, consciousness, knowing he's intelligent, but at the same time knowing that he's not just different, but he's categorically and inextricably devalued. So he goes on to go for, I think, he went to Fisk undergrad, if I recall correctly. I know he taught at Fisk. I think where he went for undergrad. What's going on? I should be informed. Oh yeah, he graduated from Fisk. So I think what it was is that Fisk is an HBCU in Tennessee. Tennessee. We should have some music. Mix-ups in this joint. So he goes to Fisk University, HBCU in Tennessee, in the land of the Cherokee and Shawnee, and additionally. And he studies to become a teacher, and he actually does teaching in the rural areas of Tennessee, and he talks about that in his book Souls of Black Folk. And so from Fisk, he goes on to Harvard University, back in his stomping grounds of New England, Boston, and studying for his PhD in Harvard, and actually graduates, being the first person of African ancestry to graduate with a PhD. I think, because I'm later informed in my progression in life and studies that, and there's another kinfolk whose name is Patrick Healy, who's also mixed, who actually passes for white, who graduates from Harvard, but he might have graduated, and he's described as the first person of African ancestry to graduate from Harvard, and he most likely does so before Du Bois, because he's a little bit older, maybe a few decades older. However, it may be that Patrick Healy graduates from undergrad from Harvard, so he might be the first person to graduate, period, from Harvard, and Du Bois may be the first person to graduate with a PhD from Harvard. So that's obviously a distinction, not just for people of African ancestry, but categorically recognizing how probably less than maybe 20% or even 10% of the people of society actually graduate from college at all. So for him to be a person of African ancestry and graduating from the first university of this continent, wada. So, and all right, I'll get into the whole colorism, counter-colorism. Wow, that was almost a joke right there. A Harlem Renaissance humor. In a minute, the back and forth about the color line in a minute. Actually, and I may like I said, may read a rendering of the introduction of the book here. So he graduates from Harvard. In that process of graduating with a PhD, he actually goes abroad. He goes overseas and studies in Deutschland. His ancestry is actually Deutsch, and he knows somewhat of his ancestry in Deutsch, which is interesting, again, because both his parents may be mixed, but he still has a knowledge about his European family, and the names, and further, and seems to have some type of recognition. I haven't, like I said, I've yet to read like further details about his life and biography, and to know about his family history and further, but what he's written in the book, and additionally, he lives in Deutschland. He has a knowledge about who his family is in Deutschland, his name, and the family who share his name. And he talks about like learning about European culture as distinct from American culture, which is extremely valuable in terms of having worldview, just categorically, but particularly conducive towards a balanced and genuine worldview and otherwise. That's beyond just the domestic trappings and boundaries and limitations of society in the United States. So he knows, he has an introduction to the world, civilization. He references it in his book, talking about the different civilizations of the world. So when a person of African ancestry has that knowledge, it's like when the East is in the house. All right. So that's a hip hop reference for those who are inclined. And again, that would be a nice musical interlude right there. So anyways, editor. It's not the DJs. We got the editors now. So DJ editor. Rewind. All right. Continuing on. So he goes to Deutschland. He gets world experience. He comes back, graduates, completes it, and then just like 68. So he graduates. Yeah. So a little bit after that, he writes the book. This right here. Which is in many ways a culmination of what he studies and learns and practices up to that point, and it becomes his what is it, the opus, Magnus opus Magnus, one of those joints, not Magnus Carlsen, but whatever, opus Magnus, whatever, and that pretty much like sets his career for the rest of life. Like he dropped the mic before there was a mic, and it's like, yo, what's going on? And it opens the doors. People in all different spheres kind of like respond to him, and he's able essentially to write his ticket. It's not as easy as that, but significantly, he's got credentials. He just did this joint over a century ago, and both black and white have a compulsive responsiveness to that. So now we get into like the politics side of his career. So that's what establishes him. That's what gives him his platform. That's what gives him some leverage. That's what gives him a seat at the table. both in the black community and black culture and organizing leadership, but also with the convention and with the world society as well. Because he done hobnob with the world's leaders through the years as well. But that's getting further into the story, into the narrative. Uh, so to talk about his political, like, life organizing or whatever else like that, it's beneficial to recognize, like, who, I'm not going to say the acronym, but who the big dog is when Du Bois is coming up. So the big dog when he's coming up is Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington is the man, like, beyond any black man in the world, or not in the world, but in the United States at any time. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, lightweight Marcus Garvey even. Marcus Garvey studied Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington is the man. He does his thing. Now the thing about it is that many people, if they listen to what Booker T. Washington proclaims and what his policy is, and additionally, many people might refer to Booker T. Washington as a sellout and as I won't say Uncle Tom, but a sellout. Meaning, and by sellout, I'm not talking about him trying to, like, pass for white or whatever and trying to, like, sell out black people. I'm just talking about, like, just like selling out his people to be inferior, to be second class, just to be, like, stay in the field, and that's it, because that's what his policy was essentially. So that's who the top dog is in the black community, so to speak, when Du Bois is coming up, and so there becomes a rivalry between Booker T. Washington and Du Bois. So before there was Tupac and Biggie, before there was MLK and Martin Luther King and MLK, before there was Malcolm and Martin, there was Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Not having different methodologies and recommendations for the black community about what the solution is. So on Booker T. Washington's side, to give a background of who he is, he grows up in the South, didn't have the silver spoon in Boston, and learning from privilege. He was born a slave, and eventually gets free during the time of emancipation. Even before that, I think, and he goes on to study at the school I go to, which is Hampton University in Virginia, the land of the Cherokee. And when he graduates from Hampton, he establishes a political machine. And so he amidst that political machine and ascendancy, I think he's based primarily out of Atlanta, or at some point, because that's not just Atlanta, it's the hotbed of black activism, particularly in Deconstruction South and otherwise. But he establishes what's referred to as the Atlanta Compromise. And so basically it was a public pronouncement to the white community and black community saying we can be as one in the hand when it comes to matters of mutual interest, and we can be as separate as the fingers when dealing with anything else. So that was a very favorable kind of policy coming from a leader of African ancestry, from an audience of people of European ancestry, particularly in the South, who have just been decimated in a civil war, and are confronted with a lot of disenfranchisement. And so there's a motivation of backing an African leader who's saying, yo, we don't have to integrate and we don't have to be equal. We can be one when it comes to necessary, like, practical things, but otherwise, we can be separate. And so North and South, Booker T. Washington gets a lot of backing for that Atlanta Compromise. And so he translates that, he flips that into establishing a university himself, Tuskegee, in Alabama, in the land of the Creek, Muskogee, and otherwise. And so now he's got this political machine, and now he's got his own school. So before, well, I won't go into that element, but before the brethren of today, he establishes his own university over 100 years ago. What's happening? Tuskegee Institute, later Tuskegee University. And it continues on the political front. So that's what Booker T. Washington is doing when W.E.B. Du Bois comes into his own. But then, W.E.B. Du Bois says, The North England got something to say. North England, New England, whatever. You know what I'm saying. Northeast New England got something to say. Anyway, so W.E.B. Du Bois drops his bars and the mic, and it's like, what's up? And so now that becomes the rivalry, and the rivalry is actually well summarized in a poem called "It Seems to Me," said Booker T. "I disagree," said W.E.B. But like I said, ain't got the poem right now. That's what I was talking about. But basically, in that poem, and it's written by a third party later on, maybe in the 60s, 1960s, in the Gregorian calendar. But it basically like lays out the basic platform of both Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. So Booker T. Washington, in being separate as the fingers of the hand, what Booker T. Washington is saying is that it's not necessary for black people to be equal to white people. We're not like don't have to fight for. I don't even know if citizenship was on that table of what he was describing, or even voting or whatever. But he's like, those matters of elitism and education and high culture, whatever else, you don't have to worry about for black people for that. Black people don't have to worry about that. Instead, black people can focus on working in the field, being independent and otherwise by just working in the field, and not worrying about ascending through the hierarchies of conventional society. So that was his platform. And again, self-sufficiency, independence, and separateness. So, and he gets support for that. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois himself says, nah, bump that. I'm not being no da da da. And there is a certain amount of classism between Du Bois and Booker T. Even though both are university educated, obviously both have different backgrounds. But Du Bois is like, yo, I'm as nice as anybody else. Like Five Dog, if I ever went solo, my favorite MC would be me. So WB was like, no, nobody got it like me, and nobody else. Well, I won't go that far. He wasn't that egotistical outright, but he's just like, yo, I'm just as nice as anybody else. I'm not going to accept a second class citizenship or status or whatever else for the sake of just getting along or whatever. Bump that. It's full experience, education, professions, all the different vocations of life. Black folk have equal access and everything to that. So we not nobody's second. And then he also shares the basic concept or the policy of the talented 10th, recognizing that black folk have access to any of the vocations in life, number one status, but at the same time, not everybody has that interest. Not everybody has that skill or motivation or otherwise. And so we recognize that there's a talented 10th within the whole of black community to focus as the intellectuals, as the mind trust for the entirety of the community, and to invest within that mind trust to uplift the entirety of the community. So it's, again, both are addressing the problems of black people in, we have to say, honest ways, like with genuine intentions, but having very different methodologies. So that's the political context and the political beginnings of W.E.B. Du Bois. And so we can get into that at this point. So colorism definitely plays a role into this. So actually Booker T. Washington is mixed too. And this is something that black folk do talk about this and are aware of it, but don't like talking about it too tough. And now in today's discourse, when we talk about black history, and additionally recognizing that the vast many of the leaders in black culture are mixed, it's another reason why when kinfolk do this whole thing about you, the mix or black, it's like, yo, know yourself and what you're saying. So Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, these are the pillars of the black community across the board. So anyway, all right, that's probably the challenge. So my point here is that both Booker T and W.E.B. Du Bois are mixed. So the colorism plays less of a factor, generally speaking, although Booker T. Washington may be considered as the blue collar, like agrarian kind of kinfolk, even though, like I said, he's university educated himself and establishes a university himself. W.E.B. Du Bois doesn't even do that. He basically attaches himself to the credentials and support from his Ivy League heritage. He has the Fisk University background and experience as a teacher, and additionally, so he's got cred that way. But he doesn't establish his own university. So, anyways, that's neither here nor there necessarily. But my point here is that there is somewhat of a distinction class-wise, but it's less of a matter of colorism, because complexion-wise, maybe Dubois is a little bit lighter than Booker T, and particularly if Booker T's in the summers in Tuskegee, he gonna get some of that sunshine. So whereas if Dubois, and I'll get to that in a second, if Dubois is in New England for the summers at Martha's Vineyard, I don't even know if Martha's Vineyard was that thing at that time, if the black dog was walking during that time, but he's probably going to be further light skinned, not necessarily because he's lighter skinned, but just because that's his climate. Because for those who know about red bones and mixedness and light skinnedness, it can change like low in the hole, if you know what I'm talking about. All right. So it's subject to change. So that's another thing. Getting caught up in all that silliness. All right. So there is a class distinction between Dubois and Booker T, particularly amongst the constituencies and who's like championing each one's respective cause. But there's less of a color line thing that I'm aware of. This is why we reason and this is why we talk. Kinfolk can respond accordingly. So that's the beginnings of Dubois' career and life work. Is in that rivalry and vying with it for attention and support, and additionally with Booker T, and particularly the methodologies, because Booker T has his way. Like, black folk ain't going to school, black folk ain't going to Harvard or otherwise, or getting PhDs. Black folk ain't doing that according to Booker T's methodology. Black folk might get an education at a Hampton or Tuskegee and then go into the field, and just that's it. Not traveling to Deutschland or even perhaps Ghana at all. So that's again Booker T's methodology, and so W.B. Du Bois, his methodology is maybe what can attributes to the whole affirmative action a century later, and we're getting to that because it's actually directly related. But then the trappings that come with that as well, in terms of being diluted, in terms of knowledge of self and being leveraged continually. And abstaining from having that space of a Fisk University, of learning about one's heritage, like learning about what plantation life is, and connecting with kinfolk and relationship, and having some rootedness and sense of self and heritage, to be able to reflect all the things that are taught and put it into context and put it into some framework of understanding and intentionality in terms of teaching and organizing and building life. So, W.B. Du Bois' methodology in and of itself alone is susceptible to being just continually just a drop in the bucket, and not even having intelligence and having knowledge and having access to different things, but not having a knowledge of self that is conducive towards the healthy well-being, mentally, physically, spiritually, heartfully, and enduringly. Because without that knowledge of self, one becomes further susceptible to manipulation, isolation, and annihilation. So that's the extreme of Du Bois' methodology. So Du Bois, what are we talking about? So basically, very simply, we're talking about his family name. So his family name is Francais, even though his family is actually Deutsch. And black folk can generally speaking, in the United States, pronounce his name as Du Bois. And what we glean is general kinfolk, is one of the reasons why that is, without it being spoken of a lot. Some people get into debates about how it should be pronounced and get very authoritative. Both have a certain strong rationale either way. However, the actuality is that his name is Francais. And the pronunciation of the S en français is not made. It's not sounded. So it's Du Bois. That's how it's pronounced in French, français, when one is speaking français. Now, Du Bois is an Americanization of that, Americanized pronunciation of his name. And so, and how he pronounces it, to be honest, I'm comparatively less aware. And to be honest, however he pronounces it is comparatively inconsequential because his name exists beyond himself. So he can have his own prerogative, and we got to respect that. But at the same time, it's not his own personal name. It's a language. So there's that. Now, one of the reasons why the Americanized pronunciation is emphasized is because in American English, those things that sound foreign, and particularly those things that sound French, the pronunciations, and additionally, sound bourgeoisie. It sounds uppity. It sounds like somebody's trying to be white. And so if someone says, "Oh, that's W.E.B. Du Bois," that sounds like, "Oh, you're trying to be white. Oh, look at you." So already there's enough cloud around Du Bois as it is. So if somebody's trying to like big up Du Bois and calling him Du Bois, oh, that must be one of them uppity, light-skinned kinfolk. And so there's then that color line plays into effect. It's class, but it's also color line, because in American culture, generally speaking, even if one is European and pronounces something with a French accent, they sound bourgeoisie. It sounds like they're trying to be educated or whatever else, even amongst European kinfolk, particularly a few generations ago. Now America is increasingly international, so it might be, well, America is increasingly international, so there might be less qualms with French pronunciation. There might be even further interest. But particularly just a few generations ago, even amongst American Europeans talking with American Europeans, European Americans talking with European Americans, there's still an admonishment about French pronunciation in addition, even though French is one of the official or one of the prominent languages that's taught intentionally within American schools. But that's basically part of the difference between the pronunciations. It's very simple, and it's I mean, it's not a big deal. I say Du Bois because I grew up learning French and speaking Francais, and so I'm honoring the language. Du Bois might have pronounced his name Du Bois or Du Bois. Like I said, I'm comparatively I'm with less of that information at the moment. I might have been told years ago, whatever else, but again, I've pronounced it Du Bois before, and I'll say one reason why in a minute, God willing. But just be aware of what the differentiation is, what the implications are. It's basically class, but it's also color, and it's the perception of people's allegiances along those color lines, because that is a thing for centuries, and particularly over the past century. Light-skinned people being bourgeoisie, being very uppity and very apartheid towards people who are darker complexion, and being extremely, like, severely eager to rise through the ranks of Eurocentrism. Yes, Eurocentrism. And doing whatever one can to like throw African and black kinfolk under the bus, and just grab further onto the European heritage and the tokens and everything else that come with it. So that is a thing. That's a legit concern and criticism, and additionally. But at the same time, it's a matter of recognizing that the contention about the name specifically is beyond just that history, that legit history, and the concerns about that. But it's like language at that point. So, and that's part of the challenge with a lot of the criticisms. Well, I'm not gonna universalize this joint at the moment, but that's Du Bois and Du Bois. Now, I say Du Bois because I grew up speaking Francais, and so that's the language. Am I trying to be white? Am I trying to be passing? Am I trying to be uppity? That's for other people to worry about or whatever else. I'm not trying to. I mean, I'm talking that talk, so how can I sound uppity? And say being Du Bois, and then be like, "Yo, what's happening?" So, like, still, kinfolk are still trying to like figure out, like, "Oh, he just crazy." That's just it, crazy. But that would be Ngozi Hadjo. That's my Muskogee name. So, but cats ain't ready to deal with that. Too tough eat. How about that? So, that being said, that's some of what Du Bois and Du Bois is. Now, further, as I was about to say a second ago, one of the reasons why I say Du Bois for a long time, actually, is because at Hampton University, where Booker T. Washington graduates, where there's a statue of Booker T. Washington pointing forward to the Emancipation Oak, there is a dormitory on the campus, in the middle of the residential campus of Hampton University. In the middle, but what I mean is that on one half of the campus it's men, and then on the other half of the campus it's women. The campus is segregated by sex, and that's a beautiful, healthy thing, because it's much further difficult to creep when the dormitory is on the other side of campus and security is making patrols. Because when kinfolk do creep past curfew and at all and at any time in the other dormitory, if they found, that's grounds for expulsion. Serious. So, anyways, in the middle of the residential campus, right by the waterfront. Oh, it's pretty, pretty. There is a residential dormitory that is called W.E.B. Du Bois, or Du Bois Hall. And most people would pronounce it as Du Bois. It would be difficult, I think, at least when I'm at Hampton, for somebody to get away with calling it Du Bois. Because the vast culture at Hampton University was one that pronounces it as Du Bois. So where you stay at? Oh, I stay at Du Bois. Okay. So interesting that. How about that? Reconciliation and diplomacy. At Hampton University, the alma mater of Booker T. Washington, there is a major dormitory, the only co-ed dormitory, actually, to be honest, and that's another thing. Co-ed meaning the men at the bottom floors, the women at the top floors. Middle of the campus, Du Bois Hall. So, beautiful thing, the black experience. So, now, and I also stayed at Du Bois Hall. My senior year, I moved back on campus. Who does that? Who moves back on campus? Who sells their car and moves back on campus their senior year? Who do that? Who do that? I do. Anyways, that being said, with all our senses collected, that's some of the experience of Du Bois and Du Bois. But wait, there's further. So after dropping the mic with the Souls of Black, well, let's think about something else about that. After the magnus opus of the Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois establishes his own political platform. And so about a century later, after the turn of the century in the Gregorian calendar, about the early 1900s, whilst many black folk are establishing fraternities, Alpha Kappa, blah, 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 blah. Well, shall I say them all? I won't say them all. I won't. All right. Alpha Phi Alpha, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, Delta Sigma Theta. Now, to be honest, the sequence here, I have to remember, but it's probably Sigma Gamma Rho, Phi Beta Sigma, and Zeta Phi Beta. And then many decades later, Iota Phi Theta. But point being, during that time frame, and that's important to recognize, because during that time, what do we have going on? We have not reconciliation. We have reconstruction going on in the South of the United States after the Civil War. So there are black senators going on, further than what have been elected ever since. But like this, it puts all this notion of progress, racial progress and harmony into perspective. But there are black senators, and additionally being established in the South during the conclusion and aftermath of the Civil War. That's again obviously 1860s and 70s into the 80s. Then there becomes the backlash and the withdrawal, and the North saying, okay, that's enough. Like, this is a little bit difficult to to monitor and to keep guard. So basically, the North leaves the South in terms of being an occupying force and whatever. And so the North continues on to focus on what the North is doing, and in that void wreck shop, the white kinfolk start going at black kinfolk and whatever else. And so a lot of the atrocities and the things go double up, because still there's no slavery, there's sharecropping, and additionally, but now there's if black folk think they're still free and trying to be uppity, we'll show what you uppity is on a tree in a rope. So that's what's going on uh, towards the latter part of the century and the beginning part of the 19th century in the Gregorian calendar. One of the highest rates of lynchings during that period. And so for black kinfolk who are going to universities, particularly even in the North, there is an increasing incentive to connect and build and support each other because it's being, particularly when going to a PWI, a predominantly European institute, it's difficult to be an individual in those circumstances. And so it's beneficial to connect with each other. And so, at least for a number of fraternities, particularly with Kappa Alpha Psi, that's a motivation for establishing a fraternity, is to have that connection and solidarity in a meaningful way, not just for academics, but to support each other in social experience and family, and additionally. And so to be honest, I know less about the history about Alpha Phi Alpha at Cornell, but that's also a PWI. Omega Psi Phi, Delta Sigma Theta, Alpha Kappa Alpha are established at Howard University, which is an HBCU. Sigma Gamma Rho is established at Butler University in Indiana. Kappa Alpha Psi in Indiana as well, Indiana University, the land of the Ojibwe and the Miami. And Phi Beta Sigma and both Sigma Gamma Rho, I think, are also Phi Beta Sigma and Zeta Phi Beta are established at Howard University as well. So Howard University is a house for so many things. But there's a lot of lynchings going on at the turn of the century. There's a lot of necessity for kinfolk, particularly in the echelons of academia and whatever, to connect with each other. And so it's in that environment that a lot of the fraternities are established. The fraternities and sororities are established. And one of the reasons why the fraternities and sororities are established, so for those who are familiar with Black Greek experience in life and just see like party and egotism and boisterousness or whatever, to understand that the history and the purpose of it is actually very foundational and further redemptive and intentional, rather than just like being like some party kind of thing or whatever, social group. So that's the history, because exactly during that time there's a lot of affliction. Now, at that time, I think it's 1903. Okay, the book is published in 1903 in the Gregorian calendar, and I think it's actually about that same time that W.E.B. Du Bois convenes with other leadership, convenes the Niagara movement. So the Niagara movement is a group of leaders, a lot of progressive leaders, and again, the whole politics was different. Republican, Democrat were different than what it is today. But a lot of the progressive, quote unquote, progressive leadership in society is gathered together, particularly a number of prominent African leaders and intellectuals gathered together at a facility in Niagara Falls, probably not Canada, but probably New York side. But anyways, around Niagara Falls, and then like establishes like a strategy for changing the law, changing policy to be further harmonious racially, and so that gathering and that strategy and movement becomes well, it's referred to as the Niagara movement, and that is actually the precursor and the foundation for what later becomes the civil rights movement. So that I mean, obviously, it doesn't begin at that moment because everything has further roots, but the Niagara movement is a significant conduit for the organizing and methodologies of the civil rights movement, even before Martin Luther King and civil disobedience. We're talking about, to be honest, in many ways, and I have to to confirm the specific relationship, but part of that heritage, just generally speaking, involves A. Philip Randolph and the labor organizing of the Porters Union, which is the laborers who work with the trains, and organizing just like other labor movements during that time. But this is particularly of black porters, people of African ancestry, organizing for collective bargaining leverage, which again, just a few decades and generations ago, we're talking about slaves, and now we're talking about people of African ancestry organizing for labor rights and favorable labor wages and conditions. So that's advancing the game, and even further, we're talking about Brown versus the Board of Education in the fight for integration. And again, a lot of the Black Porters Union had a distinct kind of intentionality, different from the policy of Du Bois in terms of racial integration per se, although it does speak about rights and standards of compensation and conditions for laborers. So there is that premise of equality in terms of racial labor and compensation. So there is that connection. How much the A. Philip Randolph builds from what Du Bois and the Niagara movement establishes just a few decades before that. To be honest, like I say, I haven't researched the details to confirm that one way or the other, so I just have to give that caveat. But there is definitely a connection and a congruence there. But even further, a decade or so later, then there's the Brown versus Board of the Education. That's where the Thurgood Marshall argues for desegregation within Topeka, Kansas, I want to say it is. That definitely, now, at that point, by that stage, there's a formal organization called the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. That is the Niagara movement. The Niagara movement later establishes itself as the NAACP. So, Du Bois is one of the founders of the NAACP. And the NAACP gets involved significantly as people who have an awareness of the general awareness of civil rights history and otherwise. The NAACP is at the forefront of these legal actions like Brown versus Board of the Education, and then even further later in the 50s and into the 60s. So that is established from the work of Du Bois and part of his legacy. Now, when something becomes successful, when something becomes effective, then a lot of heads get involved, a lot of minds get involved, a lot of treachery gets involved too, a lot of misdirection and otherwise, and a lot of retelling of history and mistelling of history in addition gets involved. So some want to talk about the NAACP being a racially integrated organization and the leadership, just downplaying how much of a leadership Du Bois has in it, and significantly emphasizing or overemphasizing the leadership of other kinfolk, particularly of other ethnicities. And there's a term for that. It's called whitewashing. So ain't hating, just saying. That's what it is. So just being mindful of that accordingly. Because the interesting thing, the ironic thing, and the fact of the matter is, eventually, Du Bois says bollocks to the NAACP. Because in its efficacy, all of a sudden we got this cough going on. In the effectiveness of the NAACP, in terms of bringing civil rights to the forefront of the political agenda within the United States into the households of the average American through news reports and additionally through the protests and demonstrations. At that point, now there's television. After the Second World War, now the average home has television. So there's information that's being shared to families, ordinary families in Wisconsin and Nevada. And additionally, is there a Nevada during that time? That's before Las Vegas. That's a little bit of a stretch. I don't think they had TVs on the res during those days either. So I will just say Kakalaki. No, it's not Kakalaki, it's California. So anyways, in all the different places around the United States, people can see what's going on in South Carolina, in Georgia. And when somebody gets an ice cream sundae thrown at them for sitting on the counter at Woolworths, it's shocking. And that person is just a young brother in a nice, smart, preppy, button-down shirt and a nice cut, clean cut hairstyle, just sitting at the counter saying, I'd like a hamburger, please. Whoop, a glass thrown in his face, and he just sits there. That's shocking. And when it reaches into the homes again, the sanctuary where people live, and they're seeing that, when children see that, they cannot unsee that. And they can't be at peace until they know that that's not happening in the same way. That's the efficacy of civil disobedience at that time with those conditions. And so NAACP is at the forefront of organizing that and becomes increasingly effective. So one of the methodologies for dissolving that is infiltrating it and then misguiding it and causing either advocating, infiltrating, and even buying one's way into, like, oh, we got this campaign, we'll invest this and the other. But then when they invest, oh, but we want this person to be part of the board, part of this that strategic group over there. So one way or another, there are these plants that are put into the organization, and then those plants start advocating for actions and things that are not necessarily out of the box, but just like off track, and not effective and otherwise, and kind of just like putting the organization in a very unstable and ineffective kind of pathway. So that's eventually what is observed within the NAACP, is a certain waywardness. That's one thing. And W.E.B. Du Bois sees that. It's not just my commentary. It's not just me speaking. Du Bois sees that. Du Bois recognizes the inefficacy eventually of the NAACP and not addressing the priority necessities within the black community. What am I talking about specifically? It would be nice to research this to have that answer. One may be, well, I'm trying to think, is there anything else to say about Du Bois' leadership before that point? There actually is. And this is where we're getting ready for the conclusion of this journey as well, because this is towards the latter part of his life. We're being reminded, Du Bois is born in 1868. So that's right as slavery is concluding, and establishes with others that the Niagara movement that later becomes the NAACP in the early 1900s. So about 40 years later, he establishes the NAACP with additional kinfolk, and then that's in the early part of the 20th century in the Gregorian calendar. Then for the next 50 years, from that point, leads the forefront of the civil rights movement. His organization and his leadership, his writings, he continues to write. He does essays. He establishes a newsletter or a newspaper called The Crisis. So he, even after he goes on to publish additional books and writings, and additionally, and that further substantiates and provides further credentials, and additionally, but he has a newspaper, The Crisis, and now we're doing a little bit of a review that I didn't say before. So he does The Crisis, and that is like, just like with Gandhi and his what was Gandhi's newspaper? It's not Tolstoy, but anyways, India Voice, I think, the India Voice or something like that. But there's a methodology for communication, of sharing a message, sharing a calling, a clarion, no, it's not carrion call, a clarion call to the community, particularly to the intellectuals, and additionally. So that's what Du Bois is doing during with The Crisis for numerous years, and then continuing to lead the NAACP in one capacity or another, all the way through the 50s and the later part of the 50s and 60s. So before I get into the whole spiel about the schism and what happens after that, I'm going to pause and backtrack somewhat for two things, because I didn't share the reading things or whatever. So again, just summary. He does these things for a long time, is a leader in many ways, travels the world during this point too, meets with leaders of government, and additionally is recognized as a leader of the black community that spans many millions of people, which is its own nation within a nation. And so he's recognized for that. There's economic influence and otherwise, much like Booker T. Washington. I didn't mention this. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I got to do series backtracking now. So much like with Booker T. Washington and what is it called? What was his political machine called? I know it's Atlanta Compromise, but there was a name for his political machine. But anyways, with the Tuskegee University, he has that credibility and that status to sit with government presidents and additionally. So Du Bois is similar with that, with a distinct constituency and otherwise. Now, the actuality is that, again, backtracking a little bit, so we're covering some of the bases that we ran past a little bit before. So during that turn of the century, as by that point, Booker T. Washington, his leadership and his machine is somewhat waning. I mean, he gets established with Tuskegee University. He establishes it as an institution, so it has its own mechanisms of self-generation and further. So it's dependent less upon his personal leadership. And so he gets towards his latter stages during that time of the turn of the century and into the first and second decade. Now, at that same time, there's another leader in the black community that rises from Jamaica, all the way from Jamaica, Caribbean. That's the very poor Jamaican accent I share here. But the point is that it is Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And Marcus Garvey shares a message that is different from both Booker T. Washington and Du Bois. The message that Marcus Garvey shares is one of black pride, black love, black solidarity, black repatriation, black dignity, black spirituality, black nationalism, and further, blackity black, black to black, and loving it. So that's what Marcus Garvey teaches. And it's not hatred, it's not hating anyone, it's loving oneself. And again, it's one of, to be honest, actually, it's one of the most significant initial stances against many generations of hatred, of black hate, of hating on black kinfolk, black nothingness, black servileness, black dehumanization, black blah. So after centuries of that, where kinfolk knew nothing other than that, by law, by happenstance, day by day, that's all kinfolk know. Here's Marcus Garvey, who says black pride, black love, black knowledge, black truth, black spirituality, black upliftment, and para unapologetic, no, I didn't whisper, no, I didn't stutter, you heard me. Resonates. Yo, people eat it, and it's healthy, and people love it. So Marcus Garvey starts to travel. Again, this is about late 19th century, early 19th century. Marcus Garvey travels, and my numbers in terms of specifics may be somewhat inaccurate, but basically around that time, Marcus Garvey travels from Jamaica all the way to Harlem. Harlem is not pronounced like that, but Harlem. It's also a Dutch word, so there we go. And it's also in the land of the Mohawks, so here we go. But anyways, Marcus Garvey travels, and he teaches this, he preaches this. You can hear his speeches of Marcus Garvey, and it's electric, it's electrifying. He lights it up, and his big thing is the Black Star Line, which is a ship established to bring black kinfolk back to Africa. That's a big thing, back to Africa, repatriation. And so that's part of what Marcus Garvey advocates and organizes. And he himself has his own machine that's like huge. The name of it, the United Negro Improvement Association, I want to say. But with all due respect, he establishes his own organization, his own political machine, like international political machine, Jamaica, United States, Canada, all around Taino land. So, again, that's early part of the 19th or the 20th century. And again, is that what I say for Marcus Garvey? Anything else? There's a lot of it. I mean, obviously, well, two things I'll say. Like I said before, Marcus Garvey studies Booker T. Washington. So it's not just a matter of he's coming out of a bubble and doesn't know anything about what's going on in the United States. He knows what's going on in the United States. He studies it. He reads about Frederick Douglass. He reads Booker T. Washington up from slavery, in addition, and is inspired by that. and that's part of his methodology and his knowledge and his foundation that he shares with others. So it's all the same. It's all part of the same lineage, and they're different nuances with the lineage, but kinfolk are building from each other. So that's part of the continuity and solidarity, one way or the other, whether we like it or not. So Marcus Garvey learns from Booker T. Washington, amongst others as well, religious leaders in addition that are lesser known in the common history books. And Marcus Garvey doesn't speak much of a religious agenda per se, but he does speak about spirituality. He does speak about God, and he does speak about getting away from the deceptive Euroification of religiosity, particularly as it pertains to Judeo-Christianity, in terms of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus, and additionally. And so, again, that's blasphemy in American history and culture. But Marcus Garvey is speaking directly about that. Now he talks about a black God in many ways. And so in our religiosity that we share here in our community with Sangha Yosef, Rastafari, and Asona Ashram, there's recognition of God existing beyond any color or even personification, he or she or otherwise. So we just give that qualification. But much of what Marcus Garvey proclaims in that respect is other than as a religious or even a Christian preacher, but it's just as a counterbalance to what has been indoctrinated for many generations before that. So it's something that kinfolk very much need to hear in terms of recognizing that God is not some specific race that is hating on people of African ancestry, because that proclamation is blasphemous. So Marcus Garvey preaches that. Marcus Garvey preaches an upliftment and spiritual upliftment as well, without necessarily a specific spiritual doctrine or creed or otherwise. It's very much a matter of solidarity in terms of black culture and black identification and black upliftment. So now, that being said, Marcus Garvey and Du Bois are not necessarily the best of friends. Very understandable. From what I understand, without trying to be rumors or whatever else, but from what I understand, because it's history, it has relevance. I think Du Bois calls Garvey a gorilla and other types of dark black, blah, blah, blah. So there is colors. I mean, that's what I was setting up when I was talking about the difference between Booker T. Washington and Du Bois, how there was less colorism. With Du Bois and Garvey, there definitely was colorism, because Marcus Garvey is definitely dark skinned, African, unapologetic, black love, and beautiful. And so, as a response to that, and amidst Marcus Garvey's ascendance, it seems some of the criticism, even shade and hate, that Du Bois points towards Garvey is, oh, look at that little primitive gorilla. And again, he's catering to his bourgeoisie support and distinction and classism, and additionally, and also colorism, favoritism amongst our kind of folk community. And that's a book reference that I'm making right there. So that's definitely not the best look for W. Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois. W. Du Bois. How about that? W. Du Bois. So now that's what Du Bois calls Marcus Garvey. And I think Marcus Garvey probably called Du Bois something about a dandy or something like that. Dandy can mean a lot of different things, particularly when it's said a century ago, just like having a gay affair is something different 100 years ago than it is today. So, but we're not going to, it ain't too much different from what we probably think it is. So we think it probably is. So anyways, talking about how Du Bois likes to dress fancy and stuff like that. That might have been the word that was utilized too. So anyways, it's shots fired in both directions. And shade on both directions, and not the best look on either direction. And so anyways, again, just like with Biggie and Tupac, it sells albums. So not excusing it, not advocating it, but just understanding it for what it is. And so each one gets raised within each one's own constituency amidst any other competitors each one may have in each one's own kind of realm and shtick. So anyways, that's part of the history again. So that was somewhat of a backtrack, as I said. Anything else in that respect? So one thing I'll note, well, yeah, I'll share one other thing, just for whatever value that this provides. It's interesting to note that um, in the midst of what I described before, in terms of the lynchings and the post Reconstruction era of the South, and when the North leaves and basically leaves a vacuum of unprotection for people of African ancestry amidst the hostilities of European kinfolk in the South. Um, Actually, Marcus Garvey has diplomatic relations with the Ku Klux Klan, and that's not we don't admonish that. And who are we to admonish one way? This is not a sales pitch here, but I was trying to give a disclaimer of non-admonishment. But anyways, just facts. Marcus Garvey has ongoing communication with the Ku Klux Klan about that recognition of like, yo, we could be separate. We don't need to mess with each other. How can we do this? So it's interesting to note that even when people are white nationalists and black nationalists, when people are genuine or increasingly genuine in that nationalism, it's not some just categorical hate that's blinded and just refuses and just is ignorant and refuses to like even acknowledge, no, they're not even human. We can't even talk to them. No, don't talk to them because they're not even human. It's a matter of like, yo, they do their thing, we do our thing. Let's find a way that we can each do our own thing and leave it at that. That's a further honest methodology of diplomacy than just hate and shade and whatever else, slave talk. So anyways, that's just the actuality. Marcus Garvey has that diplomacy with Ku Klux Klan. Most likely Du Bois doesn't, and that's not saying because of that Marcus Garvey being a settler and Du Bois not saying that. But just recognizing the intricacies of diplomacy. So for those who try to proclaim truth or some type of integrity about their platform or whatever, and taking shots in a number of different directions and trying to cite historic figures about what they did or whatever, it's beneficial to acknowledge that even Marcus Garvey, with his black love and black pride and black repatriation and black upliftment, which we big up, he also has diplomatic relations with kinfolk of other colors. So, regardless of what he may say about kinfolk of other colors, that's the actuality. So again, just recognizing the actuality. That being said, I'll get off the soapbox at the moment. One other thing that's interesting to observe is that, well, no, I won't say that. Okay. Now, we're an hour and 15 minutes. We started maybe about half an hour into this joint, so we're about 45 minutes into the actual substance. And again, this would be much nicer with like notes and preparation and topical subjects to talk about in further detail, so it's further organized, back and forth, building. Just saying. I'll read the introduction to The Souls of Black Folk that Du Bois writes in 1903. It's 19. Well, I'll get to that. This version of the book actually has a nice introduction written by the editor Randall Kenyon. It's been a while since I've read this, but it's okay. Here is the forethought for The Souls of Black Folk. Herein lie buried many things, which, if read with patience, may show the strange meaning of being black here at the dawning of the 20th century. This meaning is not without interest to you, gentle reader, for the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. I pray you then receive my little book in all charity, studying my words with me, forgiving mistake and foible, for sake of the faith and passion that is in me, and seeking the grain of truth hidden there. I have sought here to sketch in vague, uncertain outline the spiritual world in which 10,000 Americans live and strive. First, in 2 chapters, I have tried to show what emancipation meant to them and what is its aftermath. In a 3rd chapter, I have pointed out the slow rise of personal leadership and criticized candidly the leader who bears the chief burden of his race today. Then, in 2 other chapters, I have sketched in swift outline the 2 worlds within and without the veil, and thus have come to the central problem of training for men for life. Venturing now into deeper detail, I have in 2 chapters studied the struggles of the massed millions of the black peasantry, and in another I have sought to make clear the present relations of the sons of master and man. Leaving then the white world, I have stepped within the veil, raising it that you may view faintly its deeper recesses, the meaning of its religion, the passion of its human sorrow, and the struggle of its greater souls. All this I have ended with a tale twice told but seldom written, and a chapter of song. Some of these thoughts of mine have seen the light before in other guise. For kindly consenting to their republication here in altered and extended form, I must thank the publishers of the Atlantic Monthly, The World's Work, The Dial, The New World, and the Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science. Before each chapter, as now printed, stands a bar of the sorrow songs, some echo of haunting melody from the only American music which welled up from black souls in the dark past. And finally, need I add that I who speak here am bone and of the bone and flesh of the flesh of them that live within the veil. Interesting that. It's been a while since I've read that, and as I'm reading it, I observe like how detached that third person them sounds until the very distinct affirmation of association towards the end. Bone of the bone and flesh of the flesh. Yo, what's happening? So, Souls of Black Folk, and again, obviously, it's just a preview of the chapters within the book. The leader that he was talking about is Booker T. Washington. There, I think it's actually a chapter named after him, of Mr. Booker T. Washington and others. What that's a shout out, for better and for worse. A lot of interesting things. He talks about the black preacher, and that's an interesting thing to think about and to study during that time. Men of African ancestry who have some knowledge about the Gospels and the basic one authoritative construct that men of African ancestry have readily available as a leverage away from the oppression of society, because in the separation of church and state, there's a tenuous, I won't say tenuous, but there's a very diligent path men can take to be a religious leader outside of the political construct, recognizing that the political construct, even economics, is never, in America, is never going to allow for Africans to be of legitimate status to this day. Just be honest facts. That's different than how America is drawn up. It's not happening. By definition, it's not happening. It's like, by definition, a black person is not going to lead the Ku Klux Klan. It's not much of a different stretch. It's not much of a distant stretch. So just by recognizing that. Now, that being said, what a person of African ancestry can do is gain some religious knowledge and be a religious leader and work side by side amidst the political factions or political construct, and establish some authority, some economic platform, and additionally as a religious leader. And so that's nothing new. It's actually been going on for a number of centuries now, during the days of slavery even. And so W.B. Du Bois talks about that, the nature of the black preacher, and additionally, which is interesting and distinct from the European preacher. So that's one thing. The other thing also, in terms of the backtracking, I'm backtracking. It's to talk about one thing I might have like glanced over, which is the Harlem Renaissance. I think I just made a backhanded passing reference to what Harlem Renaissance, but it's very important to recognize this, and particularly its relationship with Du Bois. So, what the Harlem Renaissance is, basically, during the time of late 19-teens, 1920s, the Roaring 20s, before the Great Depression. Maybe, I don't know if definitively after the First World War, but definitely before the Second World War. And it might be earlier. It might have started earlier, like during the time of. Actually, you know what? Okay, I think actually what happened was, maybe it says here in the biography part, like when the Niagara movement happens, because I think when Du Bois has the crisis, I think the Harlem Renaissance is going on during that time. Let me just see if I can find this here quickly. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe yes, maybe so. We gonna keep it bumping though. All of us heading for the garden for sure. Haha. Well, I don't see it here. Big up Dead Prez. Um. So yeah, I'm not seeing any dates that pop off the page that show what I'm looking for. It don't show what I'm looking for. Yeah. All right. Well. All right. We're going. But what I seem to recall is that something happened with between like the crisis was actually present with something that was going on in the Harlem Renaissance. I'm trying to think of what was being organized. Something was being organized. Like there's something happened. What was that? Yo, maybe that's when it got started. The crisis got started during the Harlem Renaissance. Like there was a party, there was a gathering of intellectuals during the Harlem Renaissance, and that's when the crisis got started. I think that's yeah, okay, that's probably what it is. So again, that's in the early 1900s. Specifically, it's difficult for me to say, but I think that's what it is. So what the Harlem Renaissance is, just to describe that for those who have less of an awareness, the Harlem Renaissance is basically a time frame where it's a scene, it's a cultural scene, much like people talk about Brooklyn in the 90s in hip hop. Like that has nothing on Harlem, the Harlem Renaissance. So during this scene, there are people who are working, and so there's an economic base, and then there are people who are of letters. They're writing poetry, and doing other artistic writing novels. Nora Zora Neale Hurston. Wow, how about I get names accurate? Um, so, anyways, that's just to name a few. Just did I name a few? Phyllis Wheatley is way before that. Dunbar, I want to say is before that, but Claude McKay, County Cullen. I want to say Colors is there. Obviously, Langston Hughes. Um, uh, I said Paul Laurence Dunbar. The other one is that I always mix up. Paul Laurence Dunbar and Paul Robeson. That's the other one. So, anyways, many of those poets are involved directly within the Harlem Renaissance. So those are pillars of black literature in the United States for the past century, living or at least gathering. Some are based from the islands, some are based from other places, whatever. But Harlem, the place of Harlem, uptown New York, Manhattan, the land of the Mohawk, is the location where kinfolk would gather and would go to whatever it was. I don't know if it's the speakeasies. I don't know what the whole situation with what's it called, the liquor thing, prohibition, what that situation was. But they would be gathering at places, spots, and I don't know how much opium or heroin or whatever was being done, but kinfolk would gather together and like build, like chop it up, yo, da 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 da. And again, this is a time when it's not some there's no Soho situation. There's not, the village isn't there. This is like the thing that's going on at that moment. And because before that there was the plantation. That's the experience before the Harlem Renaissance, essentially, in terms. Or you can go to New Orleans for ragtime and get some blues. But other than that, like this is like the it's like a, I almost say a mecca, but it's a culminating spot of culture. Because to be honest, much of black experience before that time in terms of urban experience is in Washington D.C. because just naturally black folk migrate towards the White House and just like, yo, this is where the leader is. We need to holler at this one. That's what in people's mindset is. So, anyways, Harlem Renaissance was building during that time. Poets of all different ilk getting together, chopping it up, writing books, classics to this day, and establishing foundation, jazz, and additionally establishing a foundation of pretty much all black culture today. To be honest, is that hyperbole? Nah, not too much. So that's how significant the Harlem Renaissance is. And so Du Bois is all up in it too. At one of these gatherings, talking to people, establishing the crisis, to the best of my recollection. So that's part of the involvement, but it goes even further. So much so that one of the prominent poems, well, not just the poems, but the poet, one of the prominent poets of the Harlem Renaissance, named County Cullen, actually marries the daughter of Dubois. What's going on? Are you serious? That's what I've been told. So, and on that note, we're going to share a poem from that poet, County Cullen. This one is called Yet Do I Marvel. So this is not technically Dubois, but this is Dubois' son-in-law. How about that? So here we go. I doubt not God is right, well-meaning, kind. And if, how about no typos? Well, I solicit patience if this is a typo. I just noticed this here now. So, I'm just going to read it as I see it without having much access to other source for verification, but solicit patience and understanding in terms of the thing. And again, this is something that's nice to prepare ahead of time beforehand. So anyways, that being said, again, starting from the top, Yet Do I Marvel, written by County Cullen. I doubt not God is right, well-meaning, kind, and if God stooped to quibble, could tell why. The little buried mole continues blind, why flesh that mirrors God must someday die. Make plain the reason tortured Tantalus is baited by fickle fruit declare. If merely brute caprice doom Sisyphus to struggle up a never-ending stair. Inscrutable God's ways are, and immune to catechism by a mind too strewn with petty cares to slightly understand what awful brain compels God's awful hand. Yet do I marvel at this curious thing, to make a poet black and bid him sing. So that is one of the classics from the Harlem Renaissance. County Cullen, son-in-law of W.E.B. Du Bois. So part of the point of sharing that is to see, to recognize, to feel the relationship, the connection, the interaction, the informing between the participants of the culture and the movement. It's not just people. It's not just person and persons. It is a culture. Cipher, yes, but even beyond cipher. It's conditions that culminate into manifestations, prose as well as policy, and further projections, black star lines and otherwise. It's in this type of environment that other kinfolk like Kwame and Nkrumah come to visit and say, check out what's going on. It's a little bit later down the line. But when kinfolk cultivate this type of scene and this type of culture, people come and learn and are influenced and then bring it back and share. And it goes on and on and on and on. So Du Bois is a significant factor, a progenitor of that culture, of the thought that is informing the poems and the poets and otherwise. That provides a space intellectually, cognitively, socially, societally for kinfolk of African ancestry to even fathom being a writer. For teachers to recognize, oh no, black people can't actually write. It's a thing. So that's part of what Du Bois strenuously advocates for in terms of the talented 10th policy, for better and for worse. Um, Colorism is there, yes. Um, and there are further redemptive qualities as well. So, anyways, that's part of that. I've shared two writings. We're an hour and a half into this joint, and now we're ready to conclude. We're getting to the concluding part. So we go back to that part of the 50s and 60s in the Gregorian calendar of the heights of the NAACP and the schism between the NAACP and Dubois. So Dubois basically says the NAACP ain't happening. They're not doing it. Not even just a matter of not being effective, but just the intentionalities, like intentionally going towards things that are not prudent for the black community. And this is something that can be much easier to recognize today, seeing the pitfalls of assimilation, seeing it's not the end goal isn't just a matter of working side by side with people of European ancestry, even for equal pay or otherwise. And that in so much of that emphasis of civil rights and affirmative action, and additionally, there's a lot of loss of sense of self. And even further, emulation and envy and towards European culture and European people, and even just white culture and white people, and there's differentiation between the two. And a devaluation of self for being of African ancestry, and just utilizing that identity of being of African ancestry as a qualifier for receiving handouts, affirmative action handouts, to ascend through the conventional hierarchies, school, job, and otherwise. But not knowing about what it means to be of African ancestry, not knowing even about one's experience of slavery, much less one's experience of African language and culture and custom. And black just becomes a color. Black just becomes a political identity. Black just becomes a pretense for getting some kind of government subsidy. And that's why there's the angst and animosity for other people claiming black, because it's the divide and conquer, pitting each other for those crumbs, and snapping at each other for those crumbs, without actually knowing self. So that's what the concern. And Dubois sees a lot of that 50s and 60s, during 50 years ago. And seeing like the direction the NAACP is taking the civil rights movement, seeing the inefficacy, and additionally, and meanwhile, Dubois is going to Africa. He's traveling. He's meeting with African leaders. At that point, Africa is being decolonized, so the Africans are becoming presidents, like Kwame Nkrumah, during that time in the 50s. And otherwise, I'm uncertain if Dubois actually meets with Haile Selassie directly. I would imagine he actually probably does, but I've yet to be informed of that directly. But he meets with leaders from Asia and I want to say Fidel. Does he? Fidel? No, I know it's Mao. It's Mao Zedong. He actually meets with Mao Zedong, and additional leaders, world leaders. Because again, he has the intellect, he has the knowledge of civilization, and he has the platform of being a leader within the black community. Now, eventually, long story short, with all what he sees about the world, what he sees within the black community, what he sees as the priorities, and when he sees the NAACP, he already sees like his voice and his cachet or his influence or leadership within the NAACP has been already leveraged. Like at that point, there's too much of conventional hierarchies and mechanisms that are dictating where the NAACP is going, that he sees, okay, yeah, this isn't happening. So he says deuces, and he leaves the United States. He goes into exile. He says, bump all y'all, and he goes to Ghana, and that's where he passes from life. And it's very interesting. Well, like I said, I'm gonna leave it at that. But for all the things about him being like a sellout or an Uncle Tom or wannabe or whatever else like that, he spends his final days in Ghana. Mic drop again. That speaks for itself. And that's one of the things, again, when kinfolk talk about being black and additionally and still on this land, what the fuck you, all right, this is different. This is a different thing. This is not a vlog. This is a session. So I gotta hold up on the commentary. So, if it's conversational, maybe, but I'm not gonna do it Dolo style. So, all right, let's get off that. But point is, like, to recognize what true culture is, what truth is, period, and recognizing like how much kinfolk like have little clue of what the world is. And I'm a piece of dung. I'm no better or worse than anybody else. I walk with God, but a lot of people seem to be so sure about themselves and so sure about others and so clueless about what's going on in the world. I'm very clueless in many ways about what's going on in life, about the internet and game being run and everything else like that. So I know everything just as much as everybody else does. But at the same time, kinfolk like being so sure and so like double down on ignorance, it's frustrating. And anyways, all that being said, know yourself, and know the world. I'm not supposed to be preaching here either. There's not platform or the endeavor to be preachy here either. So, now the other interesting thing, and here's where we wrap it up, is that it's very interesting to recognize this because one of the prolific qualities of the life of W.E.B. Du Bois, peace and blessings be with him. Peace and blessings be with all our ancestors mentioned here today. One of the important things to recognize is his span of life and the significant projection, manifestation, trajectory that occurs during the span of his life. Serious. He is born only years after emancipation, official quote-unquote so-called emancipation, and the end of the Civil War. That's the era that he is born in. Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth. I'm stretching. I'm just naming names now. Sojourner Truth. She might be a little bit before that. Don't know. Phyllis Wheatley, I think, is actually probably 1700s actually. Anyways, that's when he's born, 1868 in the Gregorian calendar. 1868. He does his thing. Fisk University, Harvard University. Souls of Black Folk, 1903. 45 years old. Is it? No, 35 years old. What am I talking about? Do math. 35 years old. Youngster. Getting started. His initial adversaries, or not adversaries, but rivals, political rivals, Booker T. Washington and the Atlanta Compromise political machine. That's an era. That's an era of leadership. It's a paradigm of leadership. That's his contemporary during that period. Then his contemporary is Marcus Garvey, 1900s. The Black Star Line. Back to Africa. Black nationalism. That's his contemporary, we can say rivalry too, for better and for worse. Establishes the NAACP as a leader in the forefront of the civil rights movement that shapes domestic and world policy through 40s, 50s, and 60s, particularly. And all the kinfolk who come up during that period. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, to name a few. We can talk about the Black Panthers afterwards. We can even talk about Ralph Bunche and the intellectuals and otherwise. That's who his contemporaries are, world leaders for those decades. And then sees the futility in the activism in the United States that he begins, that he establishes, that he's a founder of. He sees his voice not being respected or heeded, and it's useless to try to fight against it or whatever. So goes to Africa. Continues to build, continues to connect with kinfolk in Africa. And by that point now, the NAACP is established in its heyday at that moment. Like I said, Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam, obviously that's the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But during that period now, that's a paradigm within black leadership. Black churches are organizing at this point, and I can speak less specifically details about the AME Church in additionally. But there's the tide is rising, or there's a rising of the tide for all the boats in terms of organizing and access, and the infrastructure is conducive to that as well. But there's a social climate that is increasingly conducive towards that type of organizing. There's further leeway to do that, and Du Bois is a significant factor in facilitating that. And by the time he passes in 1963, in the Gregorian calendar, again, Malcolm X is at the height of his leadership, about to make pilgrimage to Hajj and make Hajj to Mecca. Again, like I said, the NAACP is established. The Black Panthers are beginning to get established, and that foundation of the Black Power movement is getting solidified. A lot of the black culture, we can talk about Gil Scott-Heron, and additionally, beatniks is somewhat of a different thing, but the spoken word artists that emerge within the next decade, again, the foundation is being established for that at that moment, and that shapes the culture of hip hop for the next 50 years up till through today. So that is part of the work and the legacy of Du Bois and his contemporaries and further. So that is somewhat epitomized in the fact that in that same 24-hour period in 1963, 1963, in Washington, D.C., when Du Bois is sitting in Ghana and on his deathbed, making his homegoing in Ghana. Later the next day, Martin Luther King gives his I Have a Dream speech. I want to say the 28th of August, 1963. That is a very strong signal of the continuation of the baton. For worse and for better. But that's facts. That's life. That's the divine providence of the Most High, with all thanks and praise. So that's some of the life of Du Bois. That's some of the narrative. That's some of what we share. A lot of it is told here, but obviously this is 1903. That only tells the part of it. It's like reading Gandhi's autobiography. It only covers so much. The autobiography of Haile Selassie covers a lot. The autobiography of Malcolm X covers a lot. That might be topic for another conversation. But for the moment, we done did the do. Question is whether we hold on to this until other sessions are recorded, or we upload this. Well, let's hold on to this one. Yeah, let's hold on to this one. So we're going to hold on to this one and endeavor to record some other joints, see how those go, and then release all of them together. So in this joint, we give all thanks and praise to the Most High. peace and blessings and respect and honor to William Edward Bernhardt Du Bois and the work that he shares, the legacy that he shares, the inspiration that he shares for so many, and so many of so many, blessings upon blessings. And respect and honor to all the contemporaries of Du Bois, all the rivals of Du Bois, and otherwise, all our ancestors, all our prophets, and all our sages. So we give thanks for this space and this time to share this reasoning. And God willing, we will do it again. God willing, we will do it with further kinfolk directly participating. So like I said, some of the other topics we look at is Louis Riel and the Métis Nation, Eurasians of Singapore, Hafu in Brazil, Gachatvol Kaptunian, Moshe Rabbeinu, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Indo-Aryan migration. The intention is to, I might have said it before, to space this out a little bit in terms of how much I record, because I'm not researching further details about in preparing for any of these. I'm just speaking off what I know until we get some kind of response and interest communicated concerning like further iteration. So this is the test phase. That being said, I do recognize that it's beneficial to have some energy when doing these joints, because to give it at least proper respect for each kinfolk, because I think there's enough substance that's shared here that's worth listening to, at least for some duration. Point is, like, rather than just like trying to like kick these out all in one day and get it done, the intention is to have some energy and just to be able to relax and get into like a conversational kind of joint with this joint. So this joint with this joint with this joint with this joint. That being said, again, we give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari.